form of religion before or since, right? So that's something to think about. But every time I read that, Dodie, I start thinking about, my mind just goes in crazy places. And let me develop this thought with y'all for a little while this morning, and before we get any questions or any interruptions, or where are you going with this, Pat? Because I don't know. So, have you ever wondered, and again, this is my mind, not yours, so just bear with me here. Have you ever wondered why there is so much emphasis in the Bible, from the beginning to the end, so much emphasis on monogamy? One man, one woman for life. I mean, if you think about it, except in the cases of, marital infidelity, abandonment. If you go into 1 Corinthians, it talks about abandonment. And I would say an abusive relationship is a form of abandonment. I mean, that's just the way I read it. But other than that, right? Other than that, one man, one woman for life. We are the only mammals that I can think of. Now, some birds, right? They mate for life, that sort of thing. But most mammals, if you think about it, don't do that. I mean, think about deer. Every fall, around about November, necks start going big, and the does start going into heat and that sort of thing, and they find they have fight. And it's a funny thing, you can go hunting and you can watch all of these young bucks chasing the doe around, and the big buck, the big, heavy, is just standing in the back waiting on them to get tired, and then he whoops them and he takes them, right? But human beings are one of the only mammals that I can think of that are monogamous for life. Now, why is that? And why that emphasis in there? So I started looking into that a little bit, and I stumbled onto and really enjoyed reading about an ancient Jewish wedding ceremony and the way that works. And I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. Maybe Ronnie will. But it starts off like this. The vast majority of marriages were arranged. The father of the bridegroom would choose the bride for his son, for the bridegroom, right? And then they would meet and they would get together, and there's a bride's price. There's a price not a dowry, that's different, right? A dowry is something that the bride brings in, right? This is a price that is paid to the bride on behalf of the bride, and it's the bride's forever, right? So there's a bride price. And the father of the bridegroom is the one that decides what that bride price will be. Now, the bride's family gets to decide whether or not that is sufficient, okay? So they get together and they decide. The bridegroom's father says this is the price. The bridegroom's family says we accept that price. And we accept this arrangement. And when she and their family accept that arrangement, he offers her a drink of wine from a cup. If she drinks from that cup of wine, she has accepted the proposal. And they are effectively married at that time. They're not living together, but they are effectively married at that time. Then the bridegroom leaves and goes home to his father's house and builds a room onto that house. Now, if you think about it, it is not a house like we are used to, right? A single-family dwelling, like more of a courtyard and all of that stuff. So he builds another place for them to live. And it takes some time. And when he has finished building that place for them to live together as husband and wife forever, right? Then he comes back, usually with all of his groomsmen with him, with his retinue with him. Most of the time, he came back in the middle of the night with this group, and they're singing and carrying on. And what he expects to see is the bride and her group waiting for them with their candles lit, with their lamps lit and ready to go, and then the celebration begins, and then they consummate the marriage. Does that sound familiar at all? The bridegroom's father is God the Father. Before the beginning of time as we know it, he negotiated, he decided what the bride price is going to be. And that is the sacrifice of his son. And we, as the bride, accept that price. We drink from the cup, and now we're just waiting for him to come back. And I thought, forgive me for that, but that has been on my mind for a while. Let's go to Romans chapter 7. Let's start in verse 1. And again, I don't like the paragraphs. It's very important that we have these because I bought a Bible. I had said a couple of years ago that I want to get a Bible that doesn't have verses and chapters, and I haven't read it in a year because you can't find what you're looking for. It's constantly going by. So at sometimes I wish, we could just read this in here. And when they read it, it was just all the way through. And he says this, chapter 7, verse 1, "Or do you not know, brethren? For I speak to those who know the law." Now remember that in Romans, there are times in there when he's speaking specifically to Gentiles. Remember, this church is a mixed church, right? It has a lot of Jews in there that are now Christians, are following Jesus, and the rest are Gentiles. So now he's talking specifically to these. "Or do you not know, brethren? For I speak to those who know the law, that the law has dominion over a man as long as he lives." Now think about that for a second, okay? As long as a person who knows the law and is following the law, whatever jot or tittle of that law is, he's following the whole law, right? So if they're still practicing circumcision, if they're still, doing any of those things, then they are following the whole law. They are under law and not under grace. Does that make sense? Okay, now, I'm sorry. Y'all let me develop the thought, and I appreciate it. So class participation time whenever you're ready. Okay, cool. All right, so that the law has dominion over a man as long as he lives. And remember, this next part will apply equally to a man as it does to a woman. For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. Then, if while her husband lives she marries another man, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, so she is no adulteress, though she has married another man. Okay, what do you think so far? So, he's saying that if a woman, a wife, or a man, a husband, right, as long as their spouse lives, they are bound to that spouse. So that if, for any other reason other than when they die, for any other reason other than adultery, abandonment, that sort of thing, that if you were to leave your husband or your wife and you marry another man or a woman, you have committed adultery. Right? Does that make sense? Okay? Unless your spouse dies. If your spouse dies, then that bond is broken. Does that make sense? I am. I do mean that. And look at his face. It's just joy on his face. He looked like a basset down there. I'm kidding. Any comments on that? Right? Unless you die. Well, right. But why? Well, it does make sense. It does make sense. It does. It makes sense. Because that's the way God designed it, right? Because God designed it for the very purpose to show the relationship in a marriage relationship between Jesus and his church, between the bridegroom and the bride. That's why. Well, it is. But if not in the case of adultery. Okay. Or abandonment. Like if it's abusive, that could be physically, emotionally. Is that not abandonment? I mean, I don't mean to get into a marriage discussion. That's not the point. But, yeah, in 1 Corinthians. We can go there in a minute, and we can look that up if somebody wants to. I'll come to you, I promise. But I want to equate that. I want to equate what Sam just said to the relationship between Jesus and his bride. Is Jesus ever going to be unfaithful to us? Would Jesus ever be unfaithful to us? Could we be unfaithful to Jesus? Say it again. Not if. So, we've talked about propitiation, justification, sanctification, all of those things, and eventually. But if you come back and you confess those sins, right? You recognize the fact that you're sinful and you are repentant and you come back into that relationship, that is grace, right? So you're living under grace, but you are welcomed back. That is, and we talked about it last week. Say it again. It is the absolute scandal of it. If you think about it, it is an absolute scandal that we could do the things that we do and we can still be welcomed back with open arms. That is the absolute scandal of it, right? And it is fantastic and it's glorious and it's wonderful. But, yeah, so Jesus is ready to forgive every time we do. And we talked about the fact, and when we get to the first, because I'm going to do chapter 7, and then I'm going to do the first verse of chapter 8 just because, and then Tim's going to take over on chapter 8. But when he says, I find then there is now no condemnation in those who are in Christ Jesus. And in is a state of being verb, right? So it's something that I want to dive into and look at when we get there. But anyway, so cool. So then how does this equate to what we were talking about before? That this is an example of, another example of what happens to a man or a woman when they are buried in baptism and then raised again out of that water. How does that equate? How is this? I'm sorry, go ahead. I forgot to come back to you. I apologize. What was your comment? Well, hang on. Let me get a microphone. Oh, no? Okay. Well, if I don't get a microphone, then I have to summarize everything that you said. And I don't want to. Hang on a minute. Hey, everybody, dead air. I know. Where's the microphone? Falling down on here. Uh-oh. It's dead. It's dead. Okay. All right, go. I'm sorry. Go. Okay, go. Project. Project from your diaphragm. Correct. Right. Right. Correct. Right. Well, sure it does. So are you? He's using it. I know it. He doesn't say that explicitly there, but I know he does not saying that explicitly there. But I mean, do you not agree that the marriage covenant is effective for the husband as well as the wife? The husband as well as the wife?
Who's talking besides you?
Not me.
At this time, women are still property.
Correct. Correct. There's context involved, right? So I understand what you're saying in a very literal translation, and I love that. I do. But the marriage covenant applies to the man and the woman. For example, when in Matthew it talks about the woman caught in adultery, was there a man involved in that as well? Absolutely, right? But it doesn't say anything about the man. It just talks about the woman, because it's cultural. You got to remember when we're deep study in the Bible, you got to remember context is everything, right? Who's it written to? What's that culture like? All of those things. And so he just uses this as the example. Does that make sense? Okay. No, yeah. All right, cool. Any other comments? Does anybody else want to disagree with me on that?
Because we are, what then are we to sin because we are not under law but under grace? By no means. Do you not know that if you present yourself to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either to sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness.
Correct.
Like he is reiterating the same thing over and over through all of this, just
Right.
to relate to these people that he's talking to, because they may not understand the concept of even what basic marriage is. Here you go. I told you what this is. Now this is how you can apply it in life outside of this.
Right. So again, thank you, Ronnie. That was outstanding. And the point then is that chapter 6 really, or the thoughts. I mean, the whole thing goes, the whole book, right? The whole letter. But specifically, this first part of chapter 7 is relating to chapter 6 and all of the things that he was talking about. Or do you not know, right? And so he's using this as an example, saying, look, those of you that are still practicing the law, any piece of it, that you're relying on the law for your salvation, for your, any of those. In other words, if you could go to Hebrews, it starts talking about the futility of constant sacrificial worship. If you continue on with that thought, that's what he's talking about here, that it has been one price paid for all, but if you continue to practice the law, you're bound by the law and not grace. He's trying to get them to see that grace is a much better and a fulfillment of the law, but a much better way of doing things than trying to keep the law because you can't. Say it again. Say that again. Correct, 100%. And so he's using this. So he's used another. He's used an example back here, right? And now he's using this as an illustration. He's not really talking. Well, he is, but he's not. That's not his point, right? He's saying that, look, as long as your spouse is alive, except for those certain cases that Jesus and then Paul in 1 Corinthians gives us, that you are bound to that spouse for life until that person dies, right? Until the other person dies. So in this case, since he's saying, or do you not know, brethren, for I speak to those who know the law. Who dies? Who dies here in this spousal relationship? Yeah, who dies? When he says, no, wait. For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. Who dies? No, the husband. How about the law? How about it's the law that dies? It's not the husband. It's not the wife. Not in this case. This is an illustration, right? This is an example. And when he's talking about somebody dying, he's not talking about a person dying. He's talking about the law itself dying. So you are, let's say we all grew up good young Jewish kids, right? So we either went to a synagogue, or our parents taught us, or whatever, to a certain age, and then maybe you showed promise, so you went to a school for a little while, and then at about 15-ish years old or so, if you showed more promise, a rabbi would come and get you and then take you, and you would follow that rabbi, and you would become a disciple of that rabbi, right? So let's say we were that, and we grew up that way. And now, how hard would it be to give up that which the law of primacy, right? In learning the law of primacy, that which you learn first, you learn best. Does that make sense? That law of primacy, right? So that which you learn first, you learn best. So you learned the law, the sacrificial system, doing all of those things. I got you. I got you in a minute, Kelvin. All of those things, you learned those things. And now, a rabbi came along and then claimed to be God, Son of God, all those things, the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God, all of that. And you thought because of what you learned, if you read Isaiah, you were thinking earthly king, son of David, going to take that throne, kick the Romans out, reestablish Israel. And then he died. And then people say, then he wrote, and you believe that, but now how hard would it be to give up that law, to give up that which you learned first? That's what's going on here, right? And he's saying, stop it. Okay, you who know the law, because there's men and women in this. Okay, you're married to your husband, right? Now your husband has died. The law has died. That's what he's saying. The law has died. It no longer applies to you. Now, there's a lot of stuff in the law that is very important, right? The Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? And then the second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, right? All of those things. Honor your father and mother. Don't steal. Don't covet. And covet. I'm sorry, I'm going to get off on a tangent, and I don't mean to, but maybe I'll save that for a sermon sometime. But so, no, I can't. So covet. Think about that a minute. All of these other sins against other people start with coveting. Have you ever thought about that? Thou shalt not covet. Paul's going to use that very example here in a little bit, and we're going to read about that as we go through this. But he said, do not covet. I would have known that was a sin if it said do not covet, but now you've told me that, don't covet. Now I'm going to covet more, right? Now it's talking about that, how sin breeds itself. But if you think about it, if I covet something that Tyson has, and I covet that so bad, there's one, and then I'm going to go steal that thing because I want it that bad. That's two, and if he catches me do it, I might kill him. Well, there you go, right? So to me, all of these sins against other people start with coveting. It's bad. But anyway, that's my tangent. But the point is, right, we do those things. We honor those laws out of love, right? I'm not going to steal anything from Skylar because I love Skylar. He's my brother, right? I might steal it from Tyson. No, I'm kidding. But so we keep those things because of love, right? So we do those things out of love because the law has died, right? It's gone. It no longer, that's what he's saying here. Does that make sense? Anybody, any questions about that? Go, Kelvin. Sorry, I got going.
This is not working.
Okay. Verse 6 tells us all that.
Well, I know, but
but it leads up to it, and it brings in the Spirit in verse 6 that they maybe not have ever heard in their life yet, as far as a people. I didn't say that very well, but Spirit. What are you saying? The Holy Spirit, they may have not been aware of it yet. And so this is a big step. Like,
I think that a Jewish person that is steeped in the law would know about the Spirit because the Spirit is talked about, throughout the Old Testament. But the effect that it can have, right? So let's go ahead and read there. Let's start, because we got through verse 3, I think. So, so let's go back up a little bit. Let's go do verse 3. So then, if while her husband lives she marries another man, she'll be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. See? She is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she has married another man. So think about this too, and kind of what Kelvin was talking about a little bit there. Do you think these people that are having a hard time letting go of the law are having a hard time letting go of the law and putting their faith in Jesus out of guilt? It's something very, very new, right? It is very, very new. So you're telling me I've got to let go of all of this, and if I do this, I am more faithful if I just go with grace and go with faith and go with grace, that I am more faithful than if I keep this law? I think that would be a very difficult thing to do. Again, if you put yourself in their position, it would be a very difficult thing to do. That's why he's so emphatic about it. He goes, therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law through the body of Christ, that you may be married to another, to him who was raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit to God. Right? What fruit? What fruit? Okay, say it again. Okay, spreading it, okay? So what are the fruit? What's the fruit of the Spirit? What? Joy, yeah. Love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, self-control. And gentleness. I always forget gentleness. I can't, Well, she mooed at me. Did you hear that? Wow, I can't believe that. I always forget gentleness. Why? I don't know. I'm a very gentle, loving person. You can see it written on my face, how gentle I am. No, it's a joke. It's a joke. So, yeah, but I think you're right. And that is the Great Commission, isn't it? Go into all the world, preaching the word, making disciples, baptizing them, right? so that you may bear fruit to God. For when we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear fruit to death. He is getting ready to go on one of my favorite diatribes when we get over here to 13. I love it, right? But now we have been delivered from the law, having died to what we were held by, so that we should serve in the newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. So, since we were talking about that ancient Jewish marriage custom, and we talked about the fact that only in the case of, so when was that notion, right, or the idea, the notion that one man, one woman for life, when was that first talked about in the Bible? Say it again. Can you say it? Genesis, exactly right. Yeah, you can. You don't have to do it perfectly, you know. It's kind of like with airplanes when you have specific kinds of problems. You have what we call immediate action steps. You have to do it from memory, and you have to do it exactly right. But when I ask that question, they don't have to say it verbatim. They say it in order, and they have to be able to say it that I know that under duress they could say it. So for this reason, yeah. Because you can't. Because if you become one, they will leave and cleave and become one flesh. To me, that's the key to that, right? He will leave his father and his mother. So, boys, you got to go. Leave your father. Leave your father and your mother. Cleave and become one flesh, right? So one flesh. You can't. It's kind of hard to separate one flesh, right? If it's kind of ugly and bloody and all that, right? So it's just one flesh, right? So was that then a part of the law at that time? No. That's before the law, right? I mean, we go a long time. I don't know the name. Maybe Ronnie attended, but there's a lot of years between that, and a lot of stuff happens between that and when the law is given at Mount Sinai. So that predates the law, right? So is he saying here, and if you read this just literally and not understand the fact that this is an illustration, but now we have been delivered from the law, having died to what we were held by, so that we should serve in the newness of the Spirit. Anyway, does that mean that we can just get divorced willy-nilly and go on and because we're not a part of that law anymore? No. A part of it, yeah. I mean, it was certainly informed. Yeah, certainly informed. John Locke, I mean, if you go back, history, sorry, not doing that. I almost did. I'm not going to do that. I'm not doing that one. Okay, cool. So let's go to Calvin's point. But now we have been delivered from the law, having died to what we were held by, so that we should serve in the newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. What does that mean? Newness of the Spirit rather than oldness of the letter. We need a microphone, Ronnie. I don't want to have to synopsize what you just said. How you doing? You good?
You just have to see that the mindset of the people were highly legalistic, and the legalistic concepts of marriage and everything else that they lived by, that's what Jesus taught against. That's what now Paul is talking against. And it's a concept of this law binds you to the things here on earth more so than it would ever bind you to God.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing for the people of that time and even for us today to get our heads wrapped around, is that God's ways are not man's ways.
Did you read my notes? It's about my thoughts are not your thought, that, right? Out of Isaiah. So you said a word, legalist, right? So let's go down that road for a second. Legalist. Pharisaical, all those things. But how much the Jews in this church, right? Bound following the law. How much tradition rather than law is involved here? much more tradition, right? There were, God gave 613-ish, over 600 laws to follow. A lot of those were, we've got to remember, when they came out of Egypt, these were people that, they know about God a little bit, but they've been taken care of, sort of. They had been provided food, sort of, all of those things. Everything that they needed was given to them. So they really didn't know how to live together. So an awful lot of the law that was given to them was how to live together. Don't, if you get a disease, don't stay in the camp. Go outside the camp for a certain number of days. Virus, 10 days usually, right? Am I right? Ish, right? So go out there for a certain number of days, then be cleansed, and go present yourself back to the priest. You can go back in, right? A lot of that there. A lot of it was things like remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, right? We've talked about that before. But so they said, okay, you can do no work on the Sabbath, right? So then you go, okay, so what constitutes work? So they would say things like, different people, scribes and later Pharisees and all of those people. Remember, Pharisees means set apart. Pharisees thought that they were so holy, so steeped in the law, so studious, that they would be the first ones to recognize the Messiah when he comes back, but the Messiah stood right in front of them and they never saw him because they were so steeped in the law, so steeped in tradition and all of those things that they couldn't see beyond the nose on their face. So, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Do no work on the Sabbath, right? So think about this. They said you cannot carry a load. What does that mean? So they got so deep into it. Well, could you have clothes on? Because that's carrying the load. Well, yeah, you don't want a bunch of people walking around naked. You don't want that, right? So they could wear the clothes that they had on, but they couldn't carry anything else. And they could have a meal. They could prepare a meal. They could only walk a certain distance. So what they would do to get around that is they would set a meal here, like the day before. I'm going to set a meal here, take a certain number of steps and set a meal here, certain number of steps, set a meal here, right? And that way they could go and do the thing that they wanted to do and eat along the way, and they wouldn't be breaking Shabbat, the Sabbath, right? They would say things like, well, you can't farm. Farming is work, right? We all recognize that. So they started making up laws and traditions and that sort of thing to go along with that law. And they said, well, you can't spit. Because if you spit, you make mud. And if you make mud, that's farming and you've worked. Stuff like that, right? Yeah, keep going with that. Why? Why? No. Well, yeah, there's a reason for it. So cattle, sheep, goats, all of those things, right? So that's why Jesus told the parable of the lost sheep, right? You leave the 99 and you go get the one. Because they would leave the 99 and go get the one. They understood that. I would leave this 99, go get that lost sheep, because that lost sheep represented money. That lost sheep represented income, money, that sort of thing, right? So they made a law, like Kelvin said, oh, you can go get the lost sheep. If your sheep fell into a ditch, would you get it out? Yeah. Jesus asked that question, yes. So a sheep is more important than a man? And that was when the withered hand, right? So, I mean, it's, in the sin. Y'all remember that one, that story? Or that retelling of events? Right, okay, cool. All right, good. So, but the newness of the Spirit, not in the oldness of the letter. And when we start talking about, do we have traditions that we do that get in the way of yeah, I'm going down that road, Joe. Do we have traditions that get in the way of walking in the Spirit, in the newness of the Spirit, serving in the newness of the Spirit, not in the oldness of the letter? Do we have any of those in this congregation right here today? No. Let me say it again. I said it perfectly, William. Okay, so do we have traditions in this congregation, in this church, that prevent us from walking, that may prevent us from walking in the newness of the Spirit instead of the oldness of the letter? Well, yeah, there's danger in freedom, isn't there? Well, there is. There is. It's some of these things that we do keep us, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it, right? So we've talked to, yeah. Wait. Okay. Start at take.
For instance, let's say giving.
Okay.
there may be some here that think that for you to give adequately to the Lord, you have to give 10%. You may have to give 10%.
Right.
Others may not say that.
Right.
The letter of the law, the 10% died with the law. But
Yeah.
we may be trying to, and I'm not saying this congregation, but some in this congregation may say, if you're not giving 10%, you're not doing what you should be doing. And hold that to other people.
There you go.
That's the thing. You can give what it says to give from your heart
Right.
willingly. But we can try to bind things on people. I know other congregations say, you got to write out how much money you're going to give every year.
Right. Yeah.
So
been in
you
'em.
could take just something that simple, that simple little, what was law, and we could apply it here as law, but it's not law.
It's not law.
So that's just an example.
That's a good example.
Of what
It's a
we
great
could-
example. It is.
You
How about
talk-
dancing? Do you mean, you're talking about Vanderveer Street? Okay. There was one. I'm glad I waited till the last 2 minutes.
You want him to hear, want that?
Go ahead, buddy. Too late? Can we now? Can we now? Is that okay? What do you think, Tyson? Philip? What do you think? So, yeah. Do what? Depends on what you do with it. Right? Say it again. It's a matter of your heart, isn't it? It's a matter of your heart. Where is your heart and where is your mind when you go into that, right? So what we said before, who said Pat? I'll come to you in a minute, I promise. But what I said to William a minute ago is absolutely true. It is freedom is dangerous, isn't it, Louise? Freedom can be dangerous.
You're real brave asking this question and going. I'm glad you only allowed 1 minute to
Keep going.
summarize this. I'll kill all the time for you. What we're doing right now is very traditional.
A Bible class?
Well, a Bible class, worship, order of worship, singing, microphones, songbooks,
Yep.
a Bible instead of a scroll, the written word instead of just being spread.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things, I would kind of basically say, you don't throw me out, or have been man-made. We have created those things.
Of course we have. Now,
I've said it 100 times. My most enlightening thing that I have probably ever done was going to Old Mexico and sitting in a worship service in Old Mexico. Renee, we went to Torreon. You think it looked anything like what we're doing here? Absolutely not. And then people worshiped like you would not believe.
yeah. And there's, we talk about, and I'm a big fan. I like, it's like, kind of like in Africa, they are more spiritually open because of the tradition that they came from. So they are more apt to say, I don't see a demon behind every bush. Sometimes there's two. You know what I mean? And so, they're more apt to be more spiritually open, right? I don't know where I was going to go with that, but structures, there's nothing wrong with structure, right? There's nothing wrong with an absolute literal translation of what the word says, except that when it's being used as an illustration, right, there's a deeper meaning to it. A lot of people say just open the Bible and do what it says, and I agree with that, right? But there used to be, along with Joe's thought, is a hermeneutic Command, example, and necessary inference, right, Tim? Command, example, what are we commanded to do? You know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Do this in remembrance of me. You know, those things, right? Example, what did the apostles do in the early church? And then there's necessary inference, what is inferred or not spoken of, you know, in the Bible. I'm beginning to understand that type of hermeneutic, while valuable, is also restricting to me. And that's the final word. Because it's time out of me. Thank